Start by doing a little puzzle practice. Here's 4 puzzles for you to solve. Push pause, try the 4 puzzles, and then push play when you're ready to check your work. All right, so now that you've got the puzzle solved up above, let's tackle a few of these problems. So we're practicing some more by splitting the middle term. So we're looking at x squared plus 6x plus 8. And we asked ourselves, what multiplies to make 8 and adds to make 6? Well, that sounds really familiar because that was the first puzzle up above. Let's go with 2 and 4. So we're going to keep our first term. We're going to split 6x into plus 2x and plus 4x. And we're going to keep our last term as it is. Then we're going to group the first term and the last term into 2 binomials and look for their GCFs. So x squared equals 2x, x squared and 2x. Let's see, they have an x in common. And the first term would need an x to get back to x squared, and the second term would need a 2 to get back to 2x. So I factor out an x and I leave behind an x plus 2. Then I look at the other 2 terms, 4x and 8. Those have a 4 in common. That's their GCF. The top would need me to multiply by an x, and the bottom would need us to multiply by a 2. So I factor out that positive 4, and I'm leaving behind an x plus 2. I can see that the first half and the second half have an x plus 2 in common. So I factor out that binomial common factor. That leaves behind an x and a plus 4. So there's your factorization. Let's look at the second problem. Push pause, take a moment, and try the problem for yourself. Once you're ready to compare your work to mine, push play again. When you do the problems on your own, I'm never sure which order you're going to put those middle 2 terms in. So I went ahead and did the problem both ways. Your work should either look like the work I did in green, or it should look like the work I did in blue. You can pause the video to check your work against mine, and then when you're ready, move on to the next question. We had one like this yesterday. Remember, we have the missing middle term. So the very first thing we do is we rewrite the problem with a plus 0x in the middle. That's for that missing term, the thing that makes it look wrong. So now it's a quadratic trinomial like all the other problems that we've done, and we can look to split that middle term. Let me do this one with you because this is still a new type of problem. We're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to make negative 49 and add to make 0. Well, negative 7 and positive 7 will do that. So we're going to split the middle term of 0x into a negative 7x and a positive 7x. So we'll rewrite the problem as x squared minus 7x plus 7x minus 49. Let's group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms like we always do and look for greatest common factors. So for x squared and negative 7x, their greatest common factor is an x. X would be multiplied by another x to get to x squared and would be multiplied by a negative 7 to get to negative 7x. So I factor out the x that they have in common and we leave behind an x minus 7. Then I have a 7x and a negative 49 to look at. Well, they have 7 in common, and I would multiply the 7 by x to get to 7x and by a negative 7 to get to negative 49. So I factor out that positive 7 that they have in common, and it leaves behind an x minus 7. Well, the first half of the problem and the second half of the problem both have an x minus 7. So I factor out x minus 7, and I can see that that leaves an x plus 7 for my other binomial. Let's do this problem in the bottom left corner. So I look at the 2 and the 8 to find the puzzle. I need 2 numbers that multiply to make 16 and add to make negative 17. We didn't have to do that funny trick of putting in plus 0x in the middle because it's already a quadratic trinomial. We already have all 3 terms. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to make 16 and add to make negative 17. That looks like negative 16 and negative 1. So I rewrite the problem splitting that middle term. We have 2x squared minus 16x minus 1x plus 8. Then we can group the first two and the last two, remembering to put in the plus sign because there was a negative that went with that -1. So we're looking for a GCF for 2x squared and negative 16x. They share a 2 and an x. The top needs an extra x and the bottom needs a -8. So we factor out the GCF of 2x, and that leaves behind an x minus 8. Then we look at -1x and +8. So they only share a -1. The top needs to multiply by x and the bottom by a -8 in order to get back to their original problems. So we can factor out a -1, leaving behind an x minus 8. Those two parts have an x minus 8 in common. So I factor that out and it leaves behind a 2x minus 1. There's our answer. Kind of like we did at this point in yesterday's lesson, let's go through and list the steps that we've been following to do these. Step 1 was we create the puzzle. So we're going to create and solve the puzzle. This is where we set up 16, which we got from 2 and 8. So if I'm thinking of ax squared plus bx plus c, I multiplied the a and the c to say, what do I multiply to get this? And I pull off the b to say, what do I add to get that? That's always the puzzle that we're trying to solve. Step 2 is to split the middle term using the two numbers that you just found in the puzzle. Step 3 is to create the sum of binomials. So that's when we group the first two terms together, we make sure that there's a plus sign, and we group the last two terms together. Once we've done that, we find, actually we're going to factor out each GCF. So that's where we take a number and we factor it outside of the first set of parentheses, and then we have another number that we factored outside of the second set of parentheses. Finally, we factor out the common binomial. So the common binomial we write first, and then the other two terms, so these are the other factors, create the second binomial. All right, I'd like you to follow that process to solve the last problem on the page. Once you've solved the last problem on the page, make sure to upload your work into the Google Classroom.